I'd like to share with you today a lettering technique that I use sometimes in my crafts. For this method, I use embroidery thread like the kind on the top. The bottom kind will often come apart during the process, so I don't recommend it. To begin, I mix some white glue with water. There's no exact ratio, you just want it to be more watery than goopy. I've painted the canvas ahead of time with acrylic paint and sealed it with a matte enamel. If you don't seal the acrylic paint, then because it is water-based, when you put the watered down glue on it, it will become muddy and smear. I usually use my own handwriting, but this time I'm going to try to use a font that I found online for the L. I begin by doing a rough measurement of the first piece. I use tweezers to dip the piece of thread into the glue, making sure it's thoroughly soaked. When wet, it's easy to manipulate the thread into the shape you want. The nice thing about this method is that it's easy to fix any errors, so don't worry about precise measurements. It takes some strategizing to decide how to piece the letters together. Basically, you don't want the pieces of thread to ever overlap, so anywhere the line of the letter overlaps, a new piece of thread is needed. The pieces stay wet for a long time, and even after they dry, you can simply reapply some of that watered down glue, and then you can adjust the shape as needed. For this craft, I did go back later and use a longer piece of thread for the first part of the L in order to give it more of a curve on the top. I've left that long piece at the end of the L uncut and kind of draped over the side because I wasn't sure yet how I wanted to end the letter. I'm glad I did leave it uncut because I ended up using the entire length of that. I really struggled with the S on this one because I wanted to use the font that you can see on my phone. For the sake of time, I've removed all the footage of me trying to create that S and failing. In the end, I decided to just go with my own handwriting. Here, I'm using a paintbrush dipped in the watered down glue to re-wet the thread in order to even out those curves. I find this part so incredibly satisfying to watch. I forgot how to write an A with thread, so I did write it out on the poster board that I'm using as a background, and that's a good way to visualize what you're doing. With those letters all in place, I go over them with the tweezers and with the paintbrush, just making sure everything is nice and tidy. Then you can allow the piece to dry overnight. It does take a long time for that to thoroughly dry out. The thread shrinks as it dries, which is why some of the lines look thicker than others. If you leave it as it was, the craft isn't very secure. Any exposure to water, even humidity in the air, can cause the letters to peel off. You could just spray the craft with some lacquer or enamel, but the dried on glue is a little bit reflective on that pink background, so I decided to paint the whole thing over again. I went in with a very small paintbrush because I didn't want puddles of paint around the edges of the thread. I did 2 coats, but who needs to see all of that footage, right? Here's the piece after 2 coats of pink paint. Now I am painting the letters with this lovely gold paint. You can see where I tried a pretty metallic blue, but I just didn't like the way it looked with the pink. I was way too careful with that first coat and ended up getting really spotty coverage. So on the second coat, I was a bit more messy, just trying to really get that gold soaked in there. I knew I would have to go in and touch it up with the pink paint anyway, and then I did go back and forth for a little while, you know, touching up the gold parts and then touching up the pink parts, and you can get really stuck in an eternal cycle there, so I suggest that at some point you just embrace the imperfection. To create the dot for the eye, in the past I've used a little piece of thread, but in such a small piece it tends to come undone, so it just looks like a piece of matted felt. It's not a really good look. So this time I had the idea to use a crimp tube. This is a piece used in jewelry making, and I had some of them lying around. I crimped it with a pair of pliers, and then it became a square shape, and I put it on a tilt, so now it's a nice diamond, and I just thought it looked so cute with this piece. I put some tacky glue on my finger so that I could just dip the crimp tube into the glue to hopefully not have it squeeze up around the edges when I placed the crimp tube onto the craft. It happened anyway. I just wiped it off. Move on with your life. Here's what a crimp tube looks like before and after being crimped. Lacquer time. I adore this particular product. I knew better than to spray the piece without doing a test patch first, but I took the risk and kind of regretted it because the enamel that I used at the beginning reacted with the lacquer and caused some bubbling. Look at that shine! You can see some of the bubbling on the top left corner, but the piece wasn't totally ruined, and overall I'm happy with the result. This is the best lettering that I've managed to do with the embroidery thread so far. Strategy and practice and patience do pay off eventually. For reference, this is the first piece I did with embroidery thread. I was so proud of it at the time, and I'm still proud of the work I put in, but I see so many mistakes now and so much that I could have done better. This was my first experiment with painting the thread, and I really liked that result. I just didn't like using print instead of cursive because a lot of the elegance was lost. So I hope you enjoyed this little video. I'm hoping to make some more showing my crafts. I'm still learning how to keep that camera focused. As you saw, there are some blurry parts in the video, but if you enjoy this, I will be making more in the future. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.